What's the worst thing you've ever smelled? Story 1. People think the worst smell for healthcare workers is poo, but there are some really awful chronic wounds. There are people who will sit at home despite having health insurance, literally rotting and won't come to the hospital until they develop sepsis. I've seen wounds that are black and necrotic, gangrenous, full of the foulest pus, full of maggots. You enter the patient's room and are immediately hit by the smell. Answer: these are also the people who are positive for C. diff and are constantly defecating on themselves and their wounds. You clean them and they immediately go again. It's a never-ending stream of liquid poo. So you have to clean them and their wounds and the bed and then finally yourself to prevent contamination. Throughout the process, they go a few more times. They couldn't possibly have any more shoot in them, you think. It has to end eventually. There's only so much colon to contain the excrement. And finally, after half a bag of laundry and so many wipes and basically a bed bath, they're clean and wounds freshly dressed, and they're in a new gown with fresh sheets. They might say thank you if you promise them some Lorna Doone cookies for the trouble you put them through while wiping their jerk. You're a half hour late for your break, and 5 minutes after you're stripped and clean and the sweat is about to dry on your face, they call again. They had another bowel movement and need to be cleaned. Story 2. I've got Crohn's disease, and over the summer I also picked up a random DV bug. This ended up getting me hospitalized with kidney failure. While in there, my bowel movements turned toxic. Now I know that poop isn't meant to smell nice, but this stuff was horrendous. It was a blue-green liquid that smelt reminiscent of zoos, chemical waste, and rotting flesh. I had to get a sample for testing, and the nurse who had to take it to the lab said that she'd never seen or smelt anything like it. Answer: my dad has had Crohn's disease since the mid-'80s. They didn't even know what was wrong with him at first. My mom had to take him to a university hospital, or else he would have died. So he's had this surgery 3 times where they take out his small intestines and find all the blocked areas, cut them out, and then put the intestines back in. Well, the second time he had the surgery, the doctor didn't sew him back up the right way, and apparently he was leaking in himself. This same doctor made a hole in my dad's abdomen, and he wore a colostomy bag for like 4 years. He said when he ate food, he would see it coming out of that hole. He ended up going back to the university hospital, and they told him he was lucky he was alive. His body was poisoning itself. But yeah, I remember him changing that bag, and it smelled awful. Story 3. Not worst as in vomit-inducing, but as in, oh God, no. I was my mother's caretaker after her cancer diagnosis, squamous cell carcinoma of the supraglottis. After chemo and radiation not working, she decided on hospice. The cancer was spreading, and I knew it. The lump in her neck got bigger and was very much visible. It was trailing upwards towards her ear. They took her feeding tube out so she only ate when she wanted to. One day, I was sitting on the arm of her recliner, cleaning her up from the ramen noodle broth she'd spilt on her shirt, shaky hands, and giving her her morphine. And she leaned in like she was going to tell me a secret. She was whispering because she was trying not to cry, telling me thank you and how much she loved me, and I could smell it on her breath. I could literally smell the cancer eating her alive. It was like nothing I've ever smelled before, and something I hope to never smell again. Sickeningly sweet, strangely chemical, and a hint of rot and decay. I knew my mother was dying, and I was already destroyed. But that day I went home and sobbed in my bathtub for 3 hours. She was gone 2 weeks later. The best woman that ever lived. Answer: I was in the same position as you as sole caregiver for my dad, who also died of multiple cancers. I know that smell too well. This was almost 10 years ago, and it's still burned into my memory. Just wanted to say huge admiration for doing what you did as a carer. People don't talk about how much it takes from you. I hope you recognize how strong you are for being there for her. Fudge cancer so much. Story 4. In 10th grade, this kid named Elvis, that's really his name, and some other kid took Limburger cheese and smeared it all over the radiators in school in the morning. When the heat started kicking on, it filled the whole school with the most rotten stench that burned your eyes and nose. This was a 2-story building with 4 classrooms on each floor, Catholic school. They tried opening the windows to ventilate the building, but it was midwinter, freezing cold. They ended up having to send us home because the school stank so bad and was freezing. They didn't know at the time it was the radiators. It smelled like a moldy old sponge that someone used to clean up the poop that came out of a dead body. Story 5. Dead bodies that had been found days after a carbon monoxide poisoning. They had a handyman install a new boiler. It was not installed properly, and he eliminated the whole house. The bodies had literally melted through the floor from the heat, CO, and condensation. The police thought it was a takedown scene at first. Answer: Threadjack. In my old town, there was a news story about a family that had pets and several young children, and they'd gotten a stomach virus that wasn't going away, and the mother's migraines had flared. The school nurse actually suggested that they get the house tested for carbon monoxide, and the guy turned his meter on and told the family, "Grab the car keys and the cat and dog and leave, now. Don't even put on your shoes or get your coats. It's that dangerous." He then opened all the windows, set up fans, and fixed the furnace. They stayed elsewhere until the workmen said it was okay to come back, and their stomach troubles and headaches disappeared. Story 6. A divorced husband living alone in his house lost custody of his kids. House was being foreclosed on because they couldn't keep up with payments, and committed tragic end by hanging in his shed in the yard. Took about 2 to 3 weeks or so before neighbors called the 911 for a wellness check. Thing that got me was the wasps that made a giant nest in the shed and had been feeding on him with miscellaneous other bugs. Story 7. A rotten egg. I'm pretty sure it was fertilized and went bad with a chicken fetus inside. I keep chickens and have a rooster. It was chunky. It looked like feta cheese with an ungodly smell. I cracked it, then immediately ran away from it. It was that bad. Story 8. I told this story here before, but it was a valuable lesson that stuck with me for a long time. If there's an empty subway car in NYC during rush hour, do not get on. This was maybe 15 years ago, but I will never forget. I was coming home from work and got on the 2-3 line at Wall Street going home to Brooklyn. A train pulled in. There was an empty car, and I foolishly assumed it was because the AC was out and I could handle it for a seat. I got on towards Brooklyn. Wall Street on the 2-3 is the last stop in Manhattan, and it's about 5 minutes to the next stop in Brooklyn. The doors closed before I could take a breath, and by that time it was too late. The smell hit me like truck. It was so overpowering, my eyes began to tear up instantly. And the end of the train car, there was a heap of rags that used to be a person at some point. The smell was what I imagine a World War I trench would smell like. I ran to the other side of the car, to the door between the train cars, but the door was locked. So were the windows. I knew I was trapped, but the train doors were so chute and old that there was a tiny gap that allowed the tunnel air in. The rubbery, stale tunnel air was so much better than the smell of gangrene. It was the longest 5 minutes of my life. The doors opened at Clark Street, and I ran out and into the next train car. Some unsuspecting idiots like me entered the smelly car, and just like me were unable to escape before the doors closed. I watched them with a perverse pleasure until they escaped at the next stop. Story 9. Person who was dead for the better part of a month. He looked like a mummy, and his cat had been eating parts of him. I sneezed the next day, and somewhere in some little corner of my nose there was some residual smell for that apartment, and I smelled it all over again. There were others like this, but this one was the top. I don't know how the other people in neighboring apartments didn't call sooner. It was only after a complaint was put into building management that someone investigated. The building management guy that opened the door and found him was extremely distraught. Poor guy. Not something in his job description for sure. There was also a guy who was basically dead, but somehow his heart, lungs, and brain were hanging on to the last bit of life in him. He was an alcoholic hermit. He must have shoot and puked for days all over himself and the whole apartment. He was stuck to the floor. We had to use saline to slowly wet a little bit under him at a time to get him detached from the floor. There was even a plastic grocery bag under him that was stuck to his skin so badly that we left it for the hospital to deal with later. The guy couldn't talk, just look in our direction and blink. He seems to be slightly aware of us, and he would look our way when we spoke to him. It was a family friend who finally went to do a wellness check on him after family hadn't been able to reach him for days, like almost a week. I have seen 24 to 48-hour dead people who were looking much healthier than him. Man, I could go on and on. Stuff you can't unsee and unsmell. Story 10. There were remains of a dead squirrel in my backyard, so we put it in a trash bag, put that in another trash bag with bleach, then put that in the bin for pickup. The smell of rotten squirrel was still pungent enough to knock you back 3 years later, and after multiple cleanings of the trash bin, we gave up and purchased a new bin. Story 11. Landfill leachate is easily the worst thing I've smelled. I was a laboratory chemist and I've worked with all variety of animal and human shoot. Chicken and turkey shoot is the worst shoot, but landfill leachate is worse. Leachate is highly reactive, toxic, and has a smell that sticks in skin and hair, even after showering. You can work with it one day and still smell it the next day when you sneeze or cough. Terrible shoot. Story 12. We were going away on holiday for just under 4 weeks. We hired the neighbor's kid to feed our relatively new cat twice a day. Pop in, feed, change water, wash used bowls, lather, rinse, repeat for 4 weeks. I should mention he was 12 but very mature. And as we shared a wall with his house, his mom was fine with it. He was also getting paid nicely. Sad thing is, we entirely forgot 12-year-old have to be walked through everything. Eugene was eating pouches at the time, and they're nasty in the bin. We hadn't told kid to take the small kitchen bin out every 2 days and toss into the big wheelie. Yup, 4 weeks in a very hot June of unrinsed cat pouches festering in a kitchen bin. Maggots and flies everywhere. And the smell. His mom had a right go at him, and we had to remind her we didn't tell him that bit. She asked how he didn't mention the smell, and he actually said, "What smell?" Story 13. Rotten rice. In college, I lived in a house with roommates and spring break was coming up. 3 of us left town on Friday, while one roommate was staying an extra day. He made rice in his rice cooker, only ate some of it, and then forgot to put the rest in the fridge. He left the next morning, and that rice sat on the counter for a week. I was the first one home, and the smell that hit me when I opened the door was horrifying. When I opened the lid on the rice cooker, there were little winged insects and maggots in the rice. I threw that pot in the sink, blasted it with soap, and the hottest water I could get out of the faucet, and then put it in the garage. I texted the roommate about it and where he could find his rice cooker pot. He said, "Oh, my bad." Story 14. I had my wisdom teeth removed. I had 6 of them. 2 were broken off at the gum line. I had the IV drip, just enough to completely dull the pain, but not enough to put me out. That fudge smell when they started pulling my teeth was nauseating. I don't know how I didn't throw up in the moment. Story 15. A truckload of sheep carcasses that overturned on the highway outside Salt Lake City in the middle of summer. Traffic was backed up for miles from the accident, so we just sat there creeping, agonizing inch by agonizing inch closer to it as they baked on the asphalt in the sweltering sun. The horrific odor of passing warmed over and increasing in intensity by the moment and in proximity as we slowly encroached upon the accident site. Story 16. This probably isn't the answer you want, but it's onions. I wound up with long COVID, and my type is parosmia. When my taste and smell came back, everything was altered for the worse. I lost 45 pounds because everything was so disgusting. But worst of all was coffee, garlic, and onions, the latter being the worst. It was like burnt tires, sickly sweet and rotting roadkill that's been in the sun for weeks, all wrapped up into one. They still smell a bit like that to me, but thankfully my nerves are slowly healing, so it's not as intense, though I still avoid them. And yes, I've smelled rotting bodies before. It was worse, and it's all because of that dumbass virus everyone said was just a flu. Answer: I get you. When I had COVID, I lost my sense of smell for a month. I wasn't very sick at all. My biggest complaint was losing smell. When it did come back, nothing has smelled the same to me since. Everything smells stronger now than it used to. Anything that the average person would say doesn't smell the best, like raw onions and garlic, hit me so hard now. Story 17. I went to move a hose at work and something spilled out of it. I've smelled some nasty stuff in my life, and working on a ship means we have many lovely smelling things. Sewage, oily waste, marine growth, the grease we suppart out of the galley water, bubbling bilge mud of decaying whatever makes it bubble. And growing up rural, I'm pretty accustomed to the smell of passing and decay too. I have no idea what was in this hose, nor does anyone else I work with, but just enough spilled out to make about a 3-inch puddle. In seconds, the entire space, think the size of a 2-story townhouse, smelled like someone mixed raw rotting sewage with skunk spray and dumpster juice, then carbonated it with the smell of low tide. I circulated concentrated bleach through that hose for 2 hours. Then my boss had the container I used offloaded as hazmat, which was probably overkill, but no one complained. That smell was stuck in my nose for the rest of the day and through 2 wash cycles on my clothes. Story 18. I work at a trucking company. A homeless guy crawled into one of our older trailers for the night and OD'd. He died and no one found him over a week. This was the middle of the summertime, so by the time one of us opened the doors, he was crawling with maggots and flies. Story 19. Back when I was an EMT, an elderly woman who had had a heart attack and died in her antique clawfoot cast iron tub. Said tub didn't have hot water, so she used some sort of heater under it to keep her bath warm. It took several days for her family to notice that nobody had heard from Meemaw in a bit, so they called us for a welfare check. We could smell it before we even opened the front door. We found Grandma's soup. All the meat just sloughed off her when we tried to pull her out of the tub. I hurled. Our rookie flat out fainted. That scent is seared into my brain, and I'll never, ever eat pork again. Story 20. Weeks-old bodies in the summer heat are pretty gnarly, but there was only one time I actually gagged at work. We have this one frequent flyer whose foot skin was growing over his socks, or socks were growing into his feet. Not really sure which way, but when he took his shoes off in lockup, I almost actually puked. The smell was so bad. We had to transport him to the hospital, and they had to, cut the socks out of his feet long. Story 21. Nit as bad as the top comment, but rotting whale carcass. Cleared out a huge section of a popular beach. Indescribable smell. Part of it was salty, but the rest was egregiously bad in a way I literally do not know how to word. If I had gotten close, I would have thrown up. Full stop. The cosmic horror of smells. Robert F. Kennedy is actually insane. Not like, whoa, haha, that's crazy, dude. No, like you have to have something fudge wrong in your head to strap a rotting whale head to your car and drive off with it. Story 22. A homeless guy was living in a small camper van called 911, saying he didn't feel well. What he actually meant was he'd been stuck in the driver's seat for 3 days. 2 of those days he had a stomach bug. He was absolutely covered in vomit and liquid shoot. I mean, every stitch of clothing was soaked. He proceeded to marinate in his excrement for 24 to 36 long, over 80-degree 90 humidity hours. Unfortunately, there was another surprise waiting for us after extricating all 350 pounds of him from the car. Mr. Homeless Man was also a diabetic with neuropathy of both feet. One foot had what he described as a small wound. Against my better judgment, I removed his chute-soaked sock in the 8x10 box that is my ambulance, to find his foot was melting off and covered with thousands of maggots. 15 years working EMS, and that's as close as I've ever been to vomiting. Second place was a 500-pound man bed confided and forgotten about. 14 days he sat in bed waiting to die. Luckily, neighbors noticed a smell. Fire had to give us SCBAs because the ammonia smell was overpowering. Story 23. I went to a client's house, social housing. The guy was in a flat. He buzzed me into the main lobby and I could smell him open the door. It only got stronger as I walked the 20 meters to his flat. When I got in, I went to his bedroom to where his fuse box was. He instructed me I'd need to lean over his bed to access it. The room smelt like poo, wee, BO, vomit, and strong blue cheese. But his bed was covered in about 100 empty beer cans, cigarette butts, and mystery stains. So add stale beer and smoke to that, and you have the most putrid thing I have ever encountered. I refused to work at the property and left. The whole interaction lasted less than 5 minutes, but the smell clung to my nose hairs for 3 days after that. I raised safeguarding and welfare concerns with my company at the time, and I hope he got help and support. But my word, people are disgusting. Story 24. After traveling to New Orleans and really getting a hit of that pungent smell of stagnant water, it is hard to get rid of it. Not to mention, when we were there, the city had a sanitation workers' strike. So throw that in there with several homeless people urinating outside of public buildings. I understand this city wants to maintain its historical value in the French Quarter, but come on. How do they expect so much money for tourism if they can't maintain their infrastructure? Story 25. I worked at an animal sanctuary that fed big cats with donated meat. We kept a big supply of it frozen in 2 freezer shipping containers. Our backup container failed and we didn't actually notice until the smell leaked out. So a container full of rotting meat in the hot Midwest sun. Story 26. I was sitting on the couch with my partner, and the most vulgar, passing decay smell just stunk the whole room up. I look at my male dog and see green mucus dripping out of his male body part. He had an infection in his bulbous glands and required antibiotic male body part flushing twice a day for 2 weeks, making sure the wash went all the way down to his glands. By far worst thing I've ever smelt. Story 27. Hellfire missile-roasted Iraqi insurgents. Smell and sight is unforgettable. It's been over 16 years and it continues to wake me up randomly at night. I swear to God the scent is there for just a second in the room. It's so vile. I guess any burning human body might be the same, but I thankfully lack other experience. Story 28. 1. Beyond rotten egg. I was visiting someone, a couple in their late 60s, and decided to cook a meatloaf for us for dinner. As I was prepping the meatloaf, I cracked open an egg into the bowl of ground beef before making the loaf. Although I had never seen such a thing, the egg itself was black and absolutely disgusting. The smell was horrendous. Apparently they'd buy more eggs before finishing those in the fridge, and rather than fronting the old and keeping them separated, they mixed old with new. I have no idea the age of that egg. I didn't, until that day, know an egg would turn black or smell that disgusting. I love eggs, and I'm grateful it didn't affect my love for them. The eggs. Story 29. I know a guy who bought salmon steaks on their sell-by date, kept them weekend in the fridge, drove to work on a hot day and left them in his bag for hours to then open and eat them. The smell from opening the packaging was disgusting. Watching him eat them was even worse. However, worse than all of that was the smell of his farts a little while later. How he wasn't sick is beyond me. Story 30. I was driving down a highway, miles behind a tractor trailer hauling chicken litter, poop, and dead chickens in the middle of July in southwest Missouri. I can't even describe how putrid that smell was. And I was in an old car with no AC, so that didn't help. That smell hung onto the air like its life depended on it. Even after the truck was long gone, the smell was still there 20 minutes later. Story 31. I was cracking eggs into a hot pan once, and one of them turned out to be rotten. Also, one time there was a pigeon that got into the space between the roof and suspended ceiling at my office and died. It was during a weekend in the summer, and the smell on Monday morning was ungodly. Story 32. I was at a school disco in year 8, chilling at a table, music blaring out. It was pretty chill, until the teacher walks in like, "All right, someone placed a stink bomb down, so whoever it was, if it happens again, you're going home." And I had to check this out. I walk over to the bleachers, near the canteen, and I smell it, and I almost vomited. It was so bad, the worst thing I've ever smelt in my whole life. Story 33. The smell of human bones being cut with a saw. I assume it smells similar when a body is getting burned, cremated. The smell is kinda spicy, for the lack of a better description, but also somehow sweet. It's truly disgusting and just lingers for so long. Story 34. Bile. Pure bile. Working in the ambulances and went to a woman throwing up pure, almost black bile. One of the only smells I can remember so vividly but never want to. Nearly gagging just writing this. It's what I imagine pure acid to smell of, combined with phlegm and vomit. Story 35. Worked in a morgue. Body part amputation and dissection yielded maggots. It stunk worse than passing. Also, for an autopsy, I had to laterally slice the entire length of, very full, small and large intestines. It was hot and humid and shoot was everywhere. Story 36. They pale in comparison to some of the stories here, but the 3 worst things I've smelt are, in no order, a dead deer that a Harris hawk I had a number of years back found in the woods. He stood on it, looking rather pleased with himself, as though he'd eliminated himself, while I had to go and get him off it, while holding my breath and keeping my head turned away to get marginally fresher air. Then he managed to get free again and went straight back onto it. Words were had with him. An ungodly stench that started filling our kitchen, and neither my dad or I could think what could be causing it. After repeatedly going through the fridge, freezer, and other likely places, we finally tracked it down. It was a loaf of bread that had been put in a ceramic jar a while ago, and was now completely black. A cattle farm that we drove past during a road trip in America. I doubt said farm had a single blade of grass left in the fields, and it could still be smelt for about 50 miles on. Story 37. One of those outdoor fly traps from Lowe's. You mix the stink powder into some water, and the flies seem to go ape-shoot for it. I left it outside all summer. We started to smell something, like a dead animal under my back porch, but couldn't find anything. Then we noticed something in the fly trap was swimming. There looked to be 1,000,000 flies and maggots trapped in there. The water in the bottom was swirling around all by itself. It was horrid. I had to put a pine tree air freshener in a towel and wrap it around my face to even get close to it. I waited until night to get it down and chunk it over the fence into my shoot neighbor's yard. Because fudge those guys too. Story 38. Maybe not what everyone has in mind, but I used to work at a couple ice rinks back in the day. First was at a uni, so never got involved with the refrigeration. Just cutting the ice, moving the nets at home games, locking up, opening up for pee-wee, etc. Second place I worked was down south, and they expected us to have a better understanding of maintenance, upkeep, and what to look for when things turned. Well, on my first or second day, My manager pulled out some liquid from one of the refrigeration systems. Now keep in mind, these things take up a full basement-level expanse, and wanted to show me the smell to look for if there were a leak. Forget the fact that existing sensors do that job. Basically, it was liquid ammonia. Pure. I took a good whiff and it literally knocked me on my jerk. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if it cost me years on my life. Never had any idea something like that had that power. Story 39. I was on work study in my first year of bio at the university. I received a call after dinner which called me to the cold room of my prof mentor. Another prof had stored sea urchins for a dissection lab in my prof's cold room. Facilities management called him and told him there was a terrible smell in the cold room and it needed removal immediately. He was also told we could not dispose whatever it was in university trash. This was to be my initiation into the dark side of bio. In the cold room, I found a couple of flats of dead, rotting sea urchins. I have been in various pathology labs, many sewage treatment facilities, and have seen many animals in various stages of decay. I have never, ever to this day, smelled something so horrible. I imagine this was a way to desensitize me to offensive smells. It worked. Having been an underwater research assistant in the ocean, I can attest, no matter what other posters have encountered, nothing smells as bad as decaying saltwater animals. Nothing comes close. Seawater is full of all types of bacteria who get to work as soon as something croaks and produce terrible smells. I know firsthand. Story 40. I used to deliver pizza to a very big guy who had gangrene, not confirmed but pretty sure, on his whole leg up to his upper thigh. Smelled like what I assume a dead body smells like. He was almost the size of his couch, and the only customer they allowed us to enter their house for because he couldn't really get up to accept the pizza. Poor guy. Story 41. Worked in a hotel as a receptionist. Toilets clogged, it bursted everywhere, especially in the basement. There was 2 centimeters of water full of poop on the floor, the walls, etc. They were kind enough, LOL, to bring someone to vacuum with a special tool. But we, my manager and I, had to clean the leftovers with gloves. There were massive chunks of poop. It was horrible. Story 42. Found some potatoes in one of those steam-in-bag type bags from the grocery store that had fallen behind the kitchen shelf. Don't know how long they were there, but they didn't sprout like potatoes normally do because the bag didn't have holes. It just putrefied and got liquidy and rancid in there. It was like the smell driving past the dump amplified and concentrated. Me and my partner had to hide in the furthest room while the fans and open windows did their job after we threw the taters outside. We were retching and gagging and coughing until the smell went away. I feel bad for the people in here talking about dead bodies because even potatoes were fudge horrible. I can't imagine a festering corpse. Story 43. A short-term, thank God, girlfriend who was basically raised by an older stepsister who told her that she should never clean her female body part. Even as an ignorant 19-year-old, I told her that can't be right. It was an otherworldly level of funk. Story 44. There was a lady who got hired to work in the office where I work. She was obese and looked and smelled like she had never bathed in her life. She absolutely reeked of the most unimaginably horrific jerk stench to the point that the entire office constantly smelled like never washed jerk whenever she was here. I had to hold my breath whenever I had to walk past wherever she was. There were people who had to have meetings with her in a small room with the door closed. I can't imagine how they managed to not vomit. Needless to say, her very short employment was terminated. Story 45. I remember in the early 90s, I was young, smelling something horrific outside my house that made me get up and go outside to find it. I went from one side of the backyard to the other, the smell getting progressively worse and stronger as I went. I eventually found a yellow Solo cup filled with a brown liquid, sitting on top of the water softener next to the flower beds. It was apparently a cup of liquid fish shite that my dad was using in the garden. I'll never forget that, nor the color of the cup it was in, apparently. Story 46. During EMT clinicals, my first wellness check was a dude who hadn't been out to retrieve his mail in the last couple of weeks, and we got this call after lunch. Property had a vibe that someone once lived there and was just hollow. There were 3 of us, and one of us went through the back door to unlock the house. I get in there and the smell hits, but it's a mix of spam and vomit in passing. Dude was fused to the ugly orange carpet in his bedroom between the bed and the wall. I had to step out, and when they double-bagged him, I was holding the door open, and the excess air came out on the corner I was standing at. Darn near lost my lunch. I smelled that chute for a couple of days. I haven't eaten Spam since then. Last winter, we got a call for a car wreck, and dude was past his golden hour of getting help for a stroke. He was wearing layers, and his core was still warm. Medics got there, and we had the Lucas device going on this dude. Well, dude ended up throwing up, and it smelled of liver, cheese, and beer. Don't do anal in the shower. Story 47. Walking in the woods a couple of weeks ago, my dog disappeared for 10 minutes, then came inside the house. She had rolled in a small area of wood used by raccoon dogs and badgers as a joint toilet. I never even knew that was a thing. Took me 2 hours to clean everything. I have never smelled anything remotely. Story 48. A skunk performing chemical warfare in the crawl space under my house. Let me tell you a little something about skunk smell. From a distance, it kind of smells like bad plant substance. Point blank, it smells like burning jerk. I wouldn't say it's the worst thing that my nostrils have ever come across, but I still classify it as the worst because the entire house smelled like burning jerk. Skunk spray for 2 to 3 days. It was so bad I had trouble sleeping. I suspect the skunk was on the younger side because I heard they tend to unload everything at once, while older skunks use their spray more sparingly because not even they like the smell. Story 49. ADHD brain thought, let's defrost chicken to make dinner. So I dropped a couple of chicken breasts from the freezer onto a plate in the nuke box. We, at the last minute, forgot and went out to eat. Nobody used the microwave for another few days. Then it happened. I opened it up to warm up whatever. The wave of decomposing raw chicken slapped me upside my head. And I've worked on a chicken farm and have smelled raw sewage. That was so bad. Worst smell for me. Story 50. Me and my grandma were cleaning out the fridge once because something in it smelt funny. Turned out it was a rotten yeast cube. While I was taking it outside into the garbage can, I decided to give it a good whiff because from a distance it just smelt a little bit funky. I kid you not when I say that it took everything for me to not puke my guts out on my backyard ground. Story 51. The overflowing and exploding chute tank inside a submarine, which explosively overflowed out of the chute pump, which I was on a rowing machine directly next to, along with every toilet, filling the toilet floors to a depth of about 2 inches of human chute and piss, which are directly next to the crew bunk spaces. Don't accidentally put a blow on chute tanks, guys. Story 52. Poop from a resident in an aged care home who was cytotoxic and sick with some kind of illness that made their bowel movements absolutely reek. It burned our eyes as we went in their room to help clean up. We were trying not to vomit or gag so the resident didn't feel bad, but it was so hard not to. Story 53. I used to do mission work in Honduras in the Tegucigalpa area. Once or twice a week, we'd cook a bunch of rice and beans, as much as our vehicle could carry, and take it to the Tegucigalpa dump, along with tortillas, cheese, and whatever else we had available that week. People live there in makeshift shanties and little shacks and spend their entire day scavenging for whatever they could possibly make a little bit of money for. To this day, I've never experienced the smell of that place anywhere else. Add to that the disparity and rampant poverty. It's heartbreaking all the way around. I can't tell you how upset it would make me, knowing that I only had limited resources to help the people, but I always tried to give them everything I possibly could. Story 54. Newark, NJ. I went to visit a friend in NJ and he had just got himself a new, to him, convertible and wanted to go for a drive. We got lost and we wound up in Newark, at which point we discovered 2 important and unfortunately related things. The city smelled like the world's largest open-air dirty diaper, and the top on the car wouldn't come back up. We were stuck in traffic for an hour in Shitsville with no way to shut out the smell. I showered twice when we got back just to get the stink out. Story 55. Found a small Tupperware container in my kid's room that had been with other containers of his rock collections. Shook it, and it sounded like a rock as well. So I opened it. Inside was a dead baby turtle that my son had found. Was dead when he found it, and he kept it for his collections. The smell of a decaying, rotten turtle that had sat in the sunny window for a year will haunt my nostrils for the rest of my life. Story 56. It recently had a baby, and we had a diaper genie. So the baby would poop in a diaper, and then I would put it in the cylinder. When it got full, I would take the bag of diapers out to the garbage can. I had 2 garbage cans, one with a lid and one without a lid. Trash started filling up pretty fast with a newborn, so I started using the one without a lid as sort of a spillover. I must have thrown a bag of diapers in the trash can that was open with no lid. It started raining and filled up the garbage can with no lid. I didn't want to deal with it, so I just left it there for a while. Finally, the sun came out. It really hot, so I used that as my opportunity to dump it. The smell of that poop soup was so disgusting. I will never forget it. After I poured it out, I had to pick up the diapers that had broken down and put them into a garbage bag and then into the correct can. Story 57. I dairy farmed for a while. Some farms have a dead hole. The water table was pretty high, and once it's been raining all winter, it starts to fill with dead hole soup. Bad enough on its own, but my dog decided he had found nirvana and went for a swim in it. The smell seeped into his coat and would not come out. I ended up cutting it all off. Story 58. As a surgeon, you smell some really bad stuff. I still get PTSD from amniotic fluid during birth. You don't know what I mean until you've had a woman's water break all over you during a pelvic exam. The smell of dried and old saliva in a patient with esophageal cancer who can't swallow their own spit is pretty nauseating too. Gangrenous feet, diabetic feet, infected wounds all feature. But the worst by far has to be a perianal abscess. Gut bacteria make some of the worst smells on the planet. It's so bad that the smell gets into your hands, even if you wear 2 pairs of latex gloves while straining it, and it does not wash away. Story 59. Back in 1998, I was working at a Dollar Tree, and they basically let anyone return anything for any reason. One day, this Middle Eastern dude comes in wanting to return a butcher knife he got, but he never cleaned it from whatever meat he used it on. Holy shoot, that was the worst smell ever. I had to take it to the dumpster and just put $1 in the register because I could not process it as a return. I have no idea what he cut that smelled so bad. Hopefully it wasn't a person. Story 60. Let me preface this by saying I've worked as a plumber and have been around a lot of poo and sewage. I'm currently an engineer who's worked in the NYC subway and other public buildings full of homeless. The worst smell ever was my first attempt at starting a compost pile in my vegetable garden. I kept all these rotting vegetables and plants in a sealed bin, and they turned into a nasty black sludge. You needed to wear a respirator just to open the bin. Air out your compost, people. Story 61. One of my nephew's diapers that overflowed it smelled like mashed peas, carrots, and cauliflower. I don't know what my sister-in-law was thinking, feeding him that combination, but it was enough to make my grandfather proclaim, "In the name of all things Asgard and Valhalla, what the hell am I smelling?" Story 62. Honestly, my own jerk had a week where I had received a bacterial infection in my gut after some food poisoning. The gas that was coming out of my jerk for about 3 days was so horrid. I was working the front desk of one of the dorms at my college for part-time cash, basically a makeshift concierge for maintenance calls. And the smell was so bad from one of my farts that one of the maintenance teams started investigating the nearby bathroom, thinking a sewage pipe had broken. Story 63. I was running a few miles one beautiful Saturday morning through my town, and about halfway through the run, I notice a very putrid smell. I took maybe 4 more trots and hear a very disgusting splort sound. I look down, and my right foot is covered in maggots and rotting flesh. I had stepped directly on top of a rotting armadillo that had been pecked by vultures in the middle of the summer. It had been dead for probably a few weeks. I immediately took both my shoes off and walked home in socks. The animal was concealed in a bit of grass that I had to run through to reach the next sidewalk. Story 64. Hippo carcass. I was told it had been floating for around a week. It floated for a few more days and then exploded. I'll never get away from that smell. The carcass was around 40 meters from the patio of our bungalow, which overlooked a small pan. I had Vicks Vapor Rub in both nostrils and could still smell it. On the plus side, we had lions and hyena visits for the next few days. Story 65. In college, I went over to my then-girlfriend's dorm to hang out. Her roommates then proceed to clean the fridge. They come across a Tupperware with unknown contents. I tell them that they have to smell it, but they are to chicken shoot to do so. My girlfriend tells me I have to because I am the only guy around. I proceed to smell the unholy concoction of rotten meat and rancid beans assault my nose. Instantly gag harder than a virgin on their first male body part. I could not get the smell from my nose. It burned its way in my skin. I'll never forget it. Story 66. So I'm an RN, and with that comes smelling a lot of insane smells. But let me tell you, nothing, absolutely nothing, has come close to the time I had been making homemade kefir and forgot a jar for around 9 months in a cabinet. After discovering it, my mom, who was in town at the time, braved this task with me as we knew it was going to be bad. But little did we know it was borderline poisonous. Not 1 second after opening the lid, I immediately vomited, and I saw my mom look like she was close behind. I've smelled every kind of bodily fluid in its most diseased state, and I'm telling you, it'd wear those as cologne compared to this. Story 67. Maggots crawling a necrotic leg that I had to clean. Here's a story write-up I posted a while ago. Well, haven't felt that disgusted in a long while, but it was strangely exciting. 40-year-old male in the ICU. HX of ESRD with HD, non-compliant diabetic, COPD, homelessness, stage 3 sacral pressure ulcer, peripheral arterial disease, delirium, right leg AKA and soon left leg AKA. Patient declines palliative care, resources, and wants to proceed with amputation. Daughter is 20 years old and is consulted as MPOA. Surgery scheduled tomorrow. Wound care gave us orders to remove the maggots and change the dressing on his gangrenous left lower leg and foot. Okay, lunch first though. I unfortunately brought fried rice today. We got our supplies ready and prepared for battle. Tweezers from our suture removal kits, specimen cups to trap the maggots, betadine swabs, a biohazard bag, and of course ABD pads, gauze, and ace wraps. I masked up and sandwiched an aroma pad in between a couple masks. Citrus surrounded me. It was time. We pre-medicated the patient with some Dilaudid 30 minutes prior to reduce discomfort. I gently unwrapped the ace wrap, and the smell of rotting flesh began to creep through my citrus aroma pad mask defense. The smell of necrosis is nothing new to me, but I felt the anxiety inside building as I feared of what was under that last ab pad. I pulled the pad with my specimen cup and tweezers at the ready, and another nurse next to me armed and ready as well. I was half expecting a fly to pop out when I lifted that last pad. I finally lifted the pad. Hundreds of well-fed maggots filled with black flesh quickly scurried as the hospital light hit them, and they began to retreat and burrow under the visible rotting Achilles. We started to grab them, several at a time, and place them in our specimen cups as quickly as we could. Still too slow, though, and we could see many burrowing deeply under the Achilles in the tar-like mush of the remaining flesh. Patient continued on conversation with me while I tried to engage and distract him, or maybe just myself. Maggots started to leak out from the posterior portion, one falling off the chuck pad and nearly on my shoe. I lifted the leg. More maggots. So many more. I decided for a different method. I slid my tweezers parallel into the fleshy tar pit and scooped them out onto the chuck for my coworker to grab. We probably got about 100 to 150 maggots in our cups. We painted the wound with betadine, rewrapped it, and called it good. Sorry to the surgeons tomorrow. Curious if they will leave the wrap on or not. Anyway, I just wanted to share because I have no friends or family to share this stuff with. I am sure this will not be my last time pulling maggots out of a wound. Story 68. Porta potty, the full kind. I was in the Army and deployed to Louisiana for Hurricane Katrina. While at makeshift camp to help, we didn't have enough porta potty. They would get full. Then I was deployed to Kuwait. They had porta potty in the desert. I swear the liquid would bubble from the heat. A different horrible smell. What? Story 69. As a kid, my dad let me bring home a horseshoe crab carcass from the beach. I wanted to make it into a trophy. I was young and dumb. My brother and I opened the bag it was in, passing and rotten seafood. Dad laughed his jerk off, challenging us to dispose of it. Not enough bleach in our zip code to make that mistake right. Story 70. There's a customer that shops at my store. She's overweight and sweats profusely. She has a very unique smell, one that I've never smelt anywhere else. And it's so pungent that the entire building reeks of it when she's here and well after she leaves. The most elegant way I can describe it is poopy butthole that has gone unwashed for decades with a sharp tang of belly button gunk and infected earring funk. It's a diabolical blend of acidic diarrhea and back-of-the-fridge milk carton biology experiment. It's a stench even passing itself would collapse from. An aura, if you will, of glutton and sloth, and a hatred for hygiene not even God could forgive. I've never been one for conspiracy theories, but I'm fully convinced this abomination was engineered in a top-secret laboratory by a cabal of the world's most deranged scientists, with the sole purpose of deterring extraterrestrial life from ever stepping foot on Earth. If you're reading this, I'm already dead. It's too late. Hold tightly those you care about the most. Tell them you love them. The end is nigh, and there's nothing anyone can do to stop it. Story 71. My dog once had diarrhea, ate it, then puked it back up. Oh, or one time I broke open a painted egg. The person who gifted it to me didn't blow it first, so everything was still inside. Imagine an egg that sat on my shelf for 6 years finally being exposed to the open. Story 72. As a newspaper reporter, the police allowed me to tour the home of a hoarder who had been arrested for animal abuse. The floors were knee-deep in the worst trash you could possibly imagine. I remember 3 things vividly: an entire cooked Thanksgiving turkey dinner rotting and moldy on the floor, a bird's nest with hatchlings that had all been crushed to passing by closing a window on it, and a putrid smell from all of it that filled my lungs and burned my eyes. Story 73. Fecal vomiting is by far the worst, but the most unnerving is the smell of passing. Former paramedic here, I could smell when someone was about to die, or if someone had died the previous shift on the ambulance. It was like it followed you for a bit after. Awful. Story 74. Not the worst, but definitely the most powerful. Went on a welfare check for an elderly man that had not been seen in a week. When we forced the door, we thought he was dead until he started moaning. He had fallen and laid in that spot for however long, and when we broke the seal between him and the carpet, it reeked of ammonia. Like, to the point it wasn't a smell anymore, just a burning sensation boring into the middle of your face. I stayed with him until the ambulance got there, rode the call in, and turned him over at the hospital. It took me 2 days before I could smell anything at all. Story 75. Wet and fermented corn. Not sweet corn like what we buy canned or frozen. The dry stuff that is farmed. Growing up, we had to clean out the grain elevator pit periodically, and rainwater would get in there and sit with any leftover corn. It is the foulest, most gag-inducing smell I've ever encountered. Story 76. I used to work at KFC. It almost say chicken that's gone bad, and I mean bad, the juice, the meat, etc. However, this one time someone shoot in the men's room sink. That was bad. I have never smelled anything as unholy as what I had to clean up that day. I wanted to die, and it scarred me for life. Story 77. Employer paid me $100 to crawl under a house with about 2 feet of crawl space to remove a dead opossum. It was so decomposed that a pole with a hook on the end would just tear through it without moving it at all. I had to rake it onto a sheet of plastic to drag it out. By far, worst smell ever in that unventilated and tight space. Story 78. My indoor cat got outside one night and didn't show back up until the morning. We checked him out and he looked fine, but a few days later, I was petting him and felt a scab on his back under his fur. Small little scab, and as I parted his fur to look at it, I put enough pressure on his skin to open the puncture wound and release the worst smell I ever smelled from his infection. I'll spare you the visual details, but that has left a mental scar that will never fully heal. Story 79. One day I was driving behind an 18-wheeler and it hit a skunk. I mean, it must have vaporized the poor thing. I was in mid-sentence and completely lost my breath. Coughing, choking, tears, you name it. My mother, God love her, who has no sense of smell, had no idea what my problem was. Story 80. Dead fox that was marinating behind my neighbor's garden. I remember it died right behind his fence, so we couldn't do anything about it. Obviously, no one was willing to hop a fence to get handsy with a fox that had its intestines spilling out its stomach, so we just left it and tolerated the stench. I remember it very vividly. It smelt like the stinkiest fish ever, like very, very stinky seafood that had been fermented in the sun combined with vomit. Story 81. I was in a living situation once, and the people I stayed with had too many cats in such a small living environment, so the cats wouldn't use the litter box half the time. One cat would pee on the stove. The man in the house wouldn't pay attention when he would start the burner. Cooking cat pee is the absolute worst smell. Story 82. A decaying whale carcass on the Oregon coast where I live. I can smell it to this day. I tasted it. How often do you get up close with a whale? Until you make the mistake to get close. It filled the car, my lungs, and it'll never be forgotten. Story 83. I think I wrote about this in another thread, but in my youth I worked as a nurse going home to elderly people and caring for them there. There was one man who lived a bit outside town, and he had his own house he'd bought during the Great Depression or something. His plumbing had broken and he had no water in his toilet, sink, or anything. So when he had to poop, he couldn't flush. So his solution was that he bought those small plastic bags you pick up dog poop with, and picked up his own chute and paper he'd wipe with in these small bags and tied it. Problem was that he would put them in a bucket in the toilet without a lid, and emptied it maybe once every 2 weeks. Now, if you've never smelt old poop before, I don't recommend it. P.S. After he died, they had to demolish his house. It was that bad. Story 84. Unfortunately, one of my colleagues, they're very physically and mentally ill, and they are really not taking care of themselves at all. I can deal with a lot of smells. I'll happily crawl into a stinky dumpster to scrub it clean. But when they've been in a room, the smell is so severe and it lingers so badly that I've thrown up in my mouth from the smell in a room over an hour after they were in there. I feel horrendous for them. They're a great person, but they're just so ill and aren't accepting any of the help we have offered them. Story 85. I did B2C marketing for a chain of crematoriums. Had to meet with the client to renegotiate their contract one morning. What they failed to tell me prior to our meeting is that they had the body of a partially decomposed, morbidly obese man arrive an hour before I did, and it was just put in the incinerator. The smell of burning, rotten fat combined with sores full of rotting pus was enough to make my eyes burn and throat close up. The smell was worse than the typical smell of passing. Apparently, the man died in his hallway and wasn't found for 2 weeks. I'm traumatized. Story 86. When I was a kid, my friend and I took an extra-large pickle jar, puked, and put a dead chicken in it and buried it for 1 month. When we dug it up and opened it, we took one whiff, ran away down the block, and could still smell it. I cannot describe the smell. Yes, we were weird kids. Story 87. Not as bad as most in here, but anyway. I work in a very small store, and this customer walked in, and good God, the stink from him hit me full blast. A wall of passing stench, genuinely like a punch and shock to not just my nostrils, but every part of my being. I could not believe it. Not even the most annoying customers can stop me from smiling or being polite, but my smile faded instantly, and never have I hurried to get a customer out so much. The stink remained in the store for hours, and I could taste it, even after brushing my teeth at home. How those types of people are not able to smell themselves is both baffling and infuriating, especially when they trap me in my store with their stink. At least they get to leave. Story 88. I made the mistake of putting leftovers from a restaurant in the boot of my car. I forgot about it for a long time and was driving another car for a couple weeks. The leftovers were mainly some cuts of red meat from a steakhouse. It was summer, and the meat was rotting and decaying in the intense heat in my car. The smell was what imagine finding a dead body would smell like, albeit on a smaller scale. Rotten meat. Horrific. The smell had filled the entire cab of the vehicle, despite the food being in a container in the boot of the car. I had to get the car professionally detailed after leaving the windows open for a week to air out. I had them wipe all the surfaces and shampoo the carpets to get the heavy smell out. Story 89. Flux oil. Not sure what it is, but when I was an inspector in the oil industry, another inspector was handling that stuff and got just a drop of it on him. It smells like the concentrated diarrhea of someone with a bad ulcer. I'd rather wear wastewater as perfume before smelling that chute again. Story 90. While working for Roto-Rooter, I had to climb down into the septic tank of a milking house on a dairy farm. There were about 20,000 gallons of raining milk, hay, cow urine, and cow chute about 12 inches below my feet, and I was in there for about 20 minutes. But even worse than that was the bathroom of an Arby's in Wilmington, Delaware. Someone had filled it with hot diarrhea and somehow clogged it. The manager used an enzyme-based unclogging chemical to try and open it up before they called me. It was deeply unpleasant taking care of that for them, and I refused to clean it up. I have driven behind pig trucks in NJ that smelled like oranges in comparison. It haunts me that a human body can make those smells. Story 91. I've gotten used to it relatively, but mold in potatoes or onions. I work in produce retail, and on the off, literally, occasion, we get moldy onions or moldy potatoes in the bags we sell of either product. Customers kind of nickname me the scent dog of the company I work for, since every time there's a rotten potato or onion in the bag, I smell it immediately and check like a police canine looking for substances or guns. It's pretty useful skill of mine, but I dislike smelling those chewed onions and potatoes. I'm also apparently the only one who can at work. Story 92. A dead person. Me neighbor had died in his apartment. He had bathed with the toaster, and he had swelled up almost X2 times. The water was no longer in the bathtub anymore. Anyway, it was a horrible smell in the hole throughout the stairwell in the apartment building we lived in. He left me stuff to own because he had no relatives, family or kids or whatnot. But it took long time even after a huge fan had tried to air out the foul smell before we, who lived there, could go back to live and breathe in this again. Story 93. Iron cast pan with burned food on it, being boiled away on stove with water. At some point it creates smell so disgusting you can't describe it any other way than toxic chemical burning, which actually burns your nose and lungs like acid. I could compare it to tear gas because it does feel like same as going through tear gas drill in closed metal container. Story 94. There's a few things, but I think the worst was back over 25 years ago when my family was considering buying some property. We never did. But one of the plots we looked at was down in cattle country, and there had been problems with rustlers eliminate cows. Well, they'd done it on that property, and we crested a rise and came on a eliminate field of about 20 or 30 dead cattle. They'd been dead a few days. Dear God, the smell. Story 95. I work in social care. The smell of feces, urine, and ulcerated legs are part of my day. You get used to it. I don't like the smell of unwashed people. Men in particular develop a particularly revolting smell. Unclean houses is one that turns my guts. But the number one horrible smell is passing. It's a pervasive, clinging smell. Really nasty. Story 96. Okay, so this might not be as bad, but there is a pig farm not too far from my house. I once rode my bike next to it and felt the smell. It was really sweet and putrid at once. The wind blowing into my face made it so much worse. That smell is so intense that sometimes I can feel it from my house. I live secretly 5 kilometers away from there, and it gets so bad I literally have to close every window in existence. And if I'm outside, I try not to breathe. Story 97. While working as a custodian over the summer at an elementary school, I was cleaning a classroom where the teacher had unplugged the refrigerator. This was at the end of the summer, so everything in the fridge had been rotting for a couple of months. The milk carton had expanded and broken, and a couple of apples were sitting in the bottom of the fridge. She basically made dairy prison wine. When I opened the refrigerator to clean it, the contents spilled out onto the carpet. I was dry heaving for a while after that. Story 98. When I adopted my dog, one relative adopted a sister of such. As my